The global pet food industry is estimated to be worth over 125 billion US dollars. An entrepreneur who is tapping into this opportunity is South African-born Nhlanhla Dlamini, founder of Maneli Pets. From its factory in Johannesburg, the company produces a range of pet treats and pet food products for both the domestic and international market. Nhlanhla, I'm very excited to speak to you today and learn from your experiences. If I can maybe start with the question, what about the pet food industry first excited you, and what gap did you see in the market?
Hi, Yaku. It's good to talk to you today. My passion came from initially my appreciation for South Africa's natural produce that I really firmly believed we should be doing more of or a better job in exporting to the rest of the world. Having grown up in South Africa, but also traveled to many places around the world, I realized that we South Africans have some of the best meats, we have some of the best wines, we have some of the best fruits, and the list goes on. We really have splendid raw materials and food commodities in this country. And what I wanted to do was to export some of those natural products to the rest of the world, ideally as a branded product. I wasn't set on the pet industry to start off with, even though I grew up having dogs and being a pet lover myself. But the initial nutritious idea was wanting to export South Africa's wonderful food products to the rest of the world. And I left my former job as a consultant in 2015 to scan the agribusiness landscape for various opportunities where I felt there was an opportunity to get into the market, produce and export within a reasonable time frame without a tremendous amount of capital, and into a market that's growing and receptive of the product that we would be exporting from this part of the world. The broad category of products were things like macadamia, pecan nuts, blueberries, citrus, and so on. But our meat is the one where I felt like there was a big gap for South Africa to be exporting more meat to the rest of the world. I could have gone the option or the way of exporting meat for the human market, but I wanted to export it to the pet market because it's a far more dynamic and interesting market that's been growing significantly. And currently, there's no one from South Africa or Africa that's really exporting to North America or to the US. So that was the genesis of the whole idea and what I've been trying to do with this business.
Okay, so if I can just go back a bit, can you talk a bit about your childhood and your upbringing and how you think that shaped you to become the entrepreneur that you are today?
Yes, certainly. So I was born in the 80s in Soweto, Johannesburg. I have one older sister, and my parents, who were very committed to us, spent a lot of their time working in the informal shop or spaza shop in Soweto. And that was very helpful for my family in giving us a leg up and the education we had. But watching my dad be an entrepreneur, one of the biggest takeaways I had was that I do not want to be an entrepreneur myself. It seemed like a lot of work. It's very risky. There's a lot of ups and downs, and I just wanted a stable job for myself growing up. Ideally, a corporate job somewhere in Sandton or in Cape Town, and that would have suited me just fine. I then went on to Wits to do my undergrad, and I was the first person in my extended family to go to university and finish university, and got the job that I wanted, which was as a management consultant for McKinsey and Company, starting in 2006. And I really enjoyed that work. Consulting is a very dynamic industry where you learn a lot working with really smart people. And I did well in that career for 6 years, split into two different stints. And the one stint was before I went to graduate school from 2006 to 2008. Then I went to England and to the US to do graduate school for 4 years, and then came back to South Africa in 2012 to work for McKinsey for another 3 years. So my path is really one of a child born in Soweto with a very loving and committed family that sacrificed a lot to allow me and my sister to have good education. I used that education to go into corporates, and I love corporates. But as I got to my late 20s, I really felt that I need to do more for my country. and to try and change the narrative of a lot of young Black South Africans not going the route of entrepreneurship. A lot of Black talent either goes into academia or goes into corporate, and there aren't many people that are trying to start large scalable businesses. So I wanted to also be part of a new chapter, a new wave of Black entrepreneurs that are trying to tackle the global market. So that's the path I've walked from my youth in the 80s to where I am now, and I'm now 40 years old.
While you were in Oxford, at Oxford in the UK, I believe you were also a DJ in your part time. Is that? Can you maybe talk about that? And is that still something that you're involved with?
Yes, absolutely. I love my stint as a DJ at Oxford. It gave me some spare money and also access to all the cool parties around the school, which was an added bonus. My passions are music, sports, and traveling. And when it comes to music, I think South Africa and Africa has some of the best music in the world, and the beats and melodies that we've created have now been parlayed into many other genres around the world. And that's what I try to do with my music, to play very global and very accessible music, but infusing music that is locally South African or from the African continent. It's somewhat similar to what I'm trying to do with Maneli Pets, that I'm trying to export products to the rest of the world that are very accessible and relatable to Americans, to the Brits, to Europeans, to Asians, but that are firmly South African in the ingredients and the makeup of the product. So yeah, from my traveling to my love for music, a lot of it is me trying to put Africa more into the global stage because we really do make some cool stuff here.
So after Oxford, you did your MBA at Harvard Business School. Am I correct?
That is
And
correct. So
what was that experience like? And if I can maybe add to the question, what like a lot of people, not a lot, some people have questioned the value of an MBA, especially considering the costs involved. What are your thoughts about it? Do you think it's worth it?
a very valid question. I personally really enjoyed my MBA. I found it very valuable. The people that I met there have been some of the most influential on my career, the most helpful to me as a growing man, and some of my closest friends. Many of them were at my wedding, or some of them actually my groomsmen. And it's an experience that I would have struggled to replicate in such a short time anywhere else because you've got some really smart, energized people from all around the world who are fully committed to making the most of that experience. That's my personal experience, and I wouldn't change anything about enrolling for an MBA. Stepping back from my personal experience, I absolutely concede that MBAs are very, very expensive, and the cost benefit needs to be evaluated on a case by case basis. For a lot of people, I feel like the incremental income that they make off an MBA doesn't quite justify the cost, but for many other people it does. So I think for me, I had a great experience, but many others I have said they need to really interrogate the cost benefit of doing an MBA.
Okay. So after that, you joined or started working for McKinsey again in South Africa. So how did that then go to founding Maneli Pets?
When I was abroad, I think that was part of the impetus that I had to dabble in entrepreneurship. As I mentioned earlier, I didn't grow up wanting to be an entrepreneur. It seemed like a lot of work with a lot of risk, and the payoff could be very uncertain. But living in America and studying in America, you're exposed to a lot of people that have given entrepreneurship a shot or are wanting to do so at some point too. And I felt that that was a good window for me to step away from McKinsey to give entrepreneurship a shot because if it didn't work out, and there's a very high failure rate in entrepreneurship, at least my floor wasn't all the way down to the basement. If I didn't work out as an entrepreneur, I would have lost 3 to 5 years, but I could go back to corporate or I could find another job and continue with the rest of my career and the rest of my life. So that emboldened me to give entrepreneurship a shot. Secondly, as much as I enjoyed McKinsey, I didn't feel that being a management consultant was super valuable for South Africa as a country. Where I could apply my talents to help the country was trying to create jobs, trying to strengthen the manufacturing base in South Africa, trying to help South Africa export more than it's importing. And those are the things that kind of gel with my passions and also my background, educational background. So those are the reasons I decided to step away from management consulting to give entrepreneurship a shot. I wasn't running from consulting. I was chasing an opportunity.
Okay, so you've now decided I'm going to start this pet food or pet treats business. What was your first next steps?
So the conviction to go into pet food came a year after I left McKinsey, because as I mentioned, for 6 to 12 months between resigning from McKinsey and starting the pet food business, I was looking for various opportunities around agribusiness, and it's only towards the end of that year that I was convinced that pet food is the one to go into. And what that looked like is me being a one person business to now trying to build a small team to make good on this opportunity. Before hiring people, the things that I was doing were analyzing the size of the market and its growth rate, figuring out whether South Africa can export to the rest of the world, because that wasn't a given. And even though you're allowed to export to the rest of the world, we'd never done it before. So you also need to figure out how do you do that. So I was working with state vets in the Western Cape and here in Gauteng to work through the paperwork on, do we know how to fill in this paperwork? Would you be comfortable in sending a small shipment or a container to the US? And I was talking to potential buyers in the US who I got in contact with via my MBA contacts and friends overseas to send them some samples that I was creating myself. So it was a lot of proof of concept that I was doing. And once I felt like there were a lot of puzzle pieces that were coming together, that's when I started one talking to people who I knew had some interest in going into entrepreneurship but needed a salary to say that I think I'm pretty close to now fundraising, so I'd like for you to join the team. And then secondly, starting to talk to more fundraisers to try and cobble together a team so we can formalize the idea into an actual business.
So when you reached out to these people abroad, potential buyers, did they indicate that yes, they're interested, get your factory up and running, we'll definitely buy from you?
There were a lot of no's, and the no's are mostly because it's an untested source of supply for them. If you're talking to a buyer from Petco, PetSmart in the US, and they like you as a person, but they've never sourced from South Africa, they've got a lot to lose in making that gamble and relatively little to gain. So I definitely got a lot of no's, and it was the concept seems interesting, but there just seems to be a lot of risk. For the people who were interested, their main interest was in the unique proteins that we have in South Africa that are not available around the world. Things like ostrich, venison, warthog. Thereafter, the cost advantage was also interesting to them, but that was a surprise to me. I would have thought that the cost advantage is the thing that really drives the conversation, but that was reason number two. The reason number one that it's piquing people's interest was you've got proteins that no one else can supply. And if I'm one of the few distributors in the US that's got those proteins, that allows me to protect my market share with that product category.
But if I may ask, why would pet owners in the US specifically care if their pets are chewing on ostrich or crocodile or the other proteins that is that uh, sort of something interesting for them?
Yes, so there's three different answers to that. The one answer is the answer that a vet or a nutritionist would give, that these proteins are proteins that are roaming in the wild, staying on a natural diet, as opposed to the proteins that are currently coming from feedlots and animal farms that have hormones, antibiotics, growth steroids, and a whole bunch of harmful stuff that has been now passed on to you as a consumer and also to your pets. So it's better to feed your dog or your cat free range proteins that don't have these harmful pathogens that come from commercial farms. So that's the answer from the vet, which is really compelling for many retailers and pet owners. The answer that you get from me is that it's a sustainable ecosystem. We are not harvesting these animals for the purpose of commercial industry. We're doing so to maintain a balance between fauna and flora. It's really good for the ecosystem. We're trying to build a truly sustainable business, and you would be a feature in that, or furthering our story as a sustainable business by supporting us. And then their perspective, which is the marketing perspective, is that if I've got a protein or a protein that no one else can brag that they have, that gives me an advantage. If I'm at the trade show and everyone is selling beef, pork, and chicken, and I'm at the stand and I've got some beef and some pork and some chicken, but I've also got some ostrich, some venison, and some warthog. That's cool. That's interesting. That brings people to my table. That's a talking point. So, and that's important. It is ultimately a game of competing for consumer eyeballs. And any way that you can stand out and be a little bit different to everyone else on the market, does give you an edge.
Okay, but based on that feedback, you then basically had enough confidence to go ahead with the fundraising process and build a factory.
Yes, and in all of this, I was also building a model, a operating model based on the raw materials that's available in South Africa that were currently being used for by the way industries, for example, for boerewors, for sausages, for patties, for bone meal. So abattoirs will be very keen to use those small cuts of meats and offal and bones to sell them to a big commercial factory, as opposed to having to sell them piecemeal to many other people. So the one side was the operational model of how many tons of these raw materials can I source, and what size factory does that mean? And then alongside that is the financial model. So based on the cost prices that I'm getting for all these raw materials, I then convert them into products. It's going to cost me some additional labor, electricity, and so on. And what price roughly are the export distributors offering me to see if this all makes financial sense. So those are the model that I was busy iterating on for about 3 months, 4 months, to get to a point to say that, okay, I feel like this is really looking decent and workable. And this is now the point for me to move from Excel models to building a team, fundraising, and starting to build a factory.
Can you talk a bit about the fundraising process? I believe there was a lot of rejections before you finally managed to secure funding.
A tremendous amount of rejection. And I think if there's one strong recurring theme in my journey as an entrepreneur, is having a thick skin for rejections. I'm really proud of the customers that we have, but there is a 100 long list of customers who rejected us along the way. And I'm really proud of the shareholders that I have on board and the funding partners that I have on board. That there's over 300 funders that have rejected me. So it's something that I didn't appreciate going into this industry, and something that I think would be entrepreneurs need to be mindful of. That you just need to have a hard nose for no's because you get so many of them. In my case, I'm lucky that I cast a wide net, and I had a wide net based on the my journey leading up into entrepreneurship. I had worked in consulting where you have a decent pool of people that you can tap potential funding. And I'd also served a lot of clients who, after my engagements with them, became my friends, who I could also talk to in the local economy. Beyond that, I had traveled to just over 50 countries before I had been an entrepreneur. I actually took a year off to go backpacking, and I met a lot of people all around the world, many of whom I still keep in touch with. So even though they weren't the people that had the spare capital to invest in me, when I told them that this is what I'm going to do, they would say, hey, I know 2 or 3 people that you could chat to, speak to this person. So there was a good 6 to 9 month period where my main job was just fundraising, sending out my emails to as many people as possible, seeing which of them want to have a follow up call. And then if there's a few follow up calls that are seeming positive, then getting into the due diligence. But it really is a long and arduous process. And I think at this point, my hit rate for getting funding is about 2 to 5%. So for every one funder that I get, it means I've spoken to about 50 to 100 to get that one
Wow.
funder. It really is a wide net that you need to cast in South Africa. I think in the US, there's more funding that's available, same in Europe, and you probably need to talk to fewer people to galvanize the funding that you need. But in South Africa, especially for a startup factory, it was quite challenging for me to get the funding that I required.
And what were their reasons for saying no?
A whole range, and some of which I agreed with, or I can see where they were coming from. The main one was too early stage and too risky. You don't come from a background where you run a factory and you want to build and run a factory. You want to do something that no one else has done before, which is exporting pet food and pet treats. Um, and another one was, I think, people like proven concepts. So if you're doing something that's novel, in theory, it sounds like it might lead to better returns, but they'd rather see something that feels like a playbook. So we've seen this playbook with blueberries, and now you want to do it in a different part of the country, or we've seen this playbook with macadamia, and now you want to do it in a slightly different way. This wasn't a playbook; it was a completely new script, which for some investors is really interesting. It means that there's a market that can be captured if you do it right, but for many others, they just say it feels too much of a stretch for me. But yeah, there's a variety of those reasons. In summary, I think South African investors are pretty risk averse in comparison to what I've seen in Europe and in the US. They'd rather keep their money where there's a safer and shorter time horizon to them getting a return versus what I've seen in the US. Investors are willing to take big bets on really risky projects because they know that the payoff could be really handsome.
Yeah, it's quite interesting for me from your story is that um, like you would see many people going into similar industries. They would start out making like these products in their kitchens and like starting small, and then maybe it transitions to a factory in 10 years. But you went straight in with building a factory before you even really had like solid clients.
Yeah.
What is it that you think made you think so big?
Yeah, and I ruminate on that a lot. Should we have started small and gone slowly over time? Or should we have taken the big bang approach and then try and grow into the situation or this opportunity that you created? Um, some advice that I got from a more experienced entrepreneur back when I was starting was the problems from a small business are very much like the problems for a big business. So you'd rather try and build a big business and just deal with the same sort of problems. And I took that to heart. The problems that I deal with, I think, are problems people deal with when they're operating a business similar to mine, but operating it from their backyard. So rather build something that is going to be meaningful for you, for the country on a global scale, and muddle your way to being experienced and being really good at what you're doing, but you've planted a big flag in the right part of the arena versus walking really, really slowly to get there. It's not the right answer. It's the path that I've chosen, and I'm kind of glad that I did. I think if I was dealing with the problems that I've dealt with over the last 5 years, but it was a really small business, I would have struggled to crowd in funders and people to support me because they just feel like it's a small business and a small problem versus a more meaningful business. People do want to lend their support to help you get to the next phase, to help you solve problems and so on. So I'm kind of glad that I've gone big early, even though it's come with a lot of stress.
Can you talk a bit about so once the factory was now up and running, talk about those early days, what products did you manufacture right in the beginning, and who were your first clients that you started supplying?
Yes. So we had one customer who had committed to buy from us even before I started fundraising. And they were just really excited by the prospect of importing these exotic proteins into the US market. They were pretty well established in the US in the 90s, and then they sold their business and were not operating for a while and then wanted to re enter the market, but just focusing on new proteins versus what they were doing in the past, which is beef and chicken. The product development we were doing was initially from a small rented facility that I had in Germiston here in Gauteng, and where I was going there 3 times a week to, and it was a meat production facility that makes cold meats for the human market. And they rented me a small section of the factory for me to use their fan saws, to use their ovens, to use their mixers, to come up with different products that I wanted to. And every once in a while, their supervisors or their managers would come by and give suggestions and ideas about if you tried this, if you tried that. So that was just like blue sky ideation on product that you wanted to make, knowing that's what you wanted to make was a pretty natural and simple offering using these proteins that you have. So I buy a box or half a pallet of raw material from the abattoirs, store it at this place in Germiston, and go there 3 times a week to just tinker around with different formulations, see what they come out like, what they smell like, give them to some dogs, see what the reaction is, send them to some vets, see what the reactions is. So that was what I was going for at least a year before we got the funding to start building the factory. When we got the funding to start building the factory, then we didn't need to rent the space in Germiston. We could start doing it in one corner of the factory that was finished first, where we were now doing it in a more sophisticated, more dedicated environment with not just me, but with the people that you wanted to hire, giving them some practice reps on doing some of this. The product quality was getting better and better with every month because you learn based on your mistakes, you get feedback from the market, and you also try and find ways to improve the costings. So we felt like, well, while we we're building the factory, we felt that our products were really good, good costings, and we were well, we had a good head start coming into launch when the factory is finished. The reality, however, is that producing in a small kitchen when you've got a small team in comparison to commercial production and maintaining the same quality is very, very different. And I should have known that intuitively. And if I'm making dinner for me and my wife, it's very different to me making dinner for 400 guests every single night at that scale. So the wheels started coming jangling a bit when we went from the small test facility to commercial production because you've got more people on the floor, you've got less well trained people on the floor, you've got more machines, and some of them are not performing at the level that they need to be at. So we actually took a dip in terms of our product quality and our product costings went up, which is a very hard chapter for us to grapple with because we were really confident that our products are well priced and really good quality, and they just went like this when we started commercial production. A year later, we got into a point where our quality was back to where it needed to be, and our confidence was roughly there. But it's just interesting the cycle that we had to walk from test kitchen with one person, then a test kitchen with more people, and making great improvements. And then now you've got a bespoke working factory, but your quality goes down and your costs go up for a while before you now have good quality and good costs. But yeah, it's all part of the learning journey.
But during this time where you faced like these production challenges, were you then already exporting to this American client?
Yes, we were. And that's the tough thing about building a factory and getting going is that if I take a different analogy, if you're trying to start a sports team doesn't have to play every single game. So if you start a new sports team here in South Africa, a new rugby team, they play on the weekend, they have performed terribly, but you've got the week to now regroup and think about different strategies, or you've got the whole season to think about what do you do wrong, what do you do better going forward. When you start a factory, you don't have that privilege. It has to continue moving. And also your customers have a continuous supply chain that they need to continue supplying. They can't say to their retailers in the US that, hey guys, let's pause for 3 months while the factory in South Africa tries to sort out its teething issues. So you kind of have to work through your teething issues while everything is moving, knowing all well that you're probably operating at a 5 or a 6 out of 10 versus where you thought you were, which was like an 8 out of 10. So hard realization for me because I would have really loved to say, let's just pause for 3 months to really sort out everything, which is really the time that we needed 3 dedicated months to just focus and fix everything. But you have to fix while you're moving, which was a challenge for us and also a challenge for our customer overseas.
And did it come because managing a factory and factory workers and all that is obviously not something that you've done before this. Did it come naturally for you to be in charge of such an environment, or yeah, what was it like?
The factory was quite large and still is quite large. And I'd never set out to be the person who runs the factory. I think I could learn it, but it's one, it's not my core talent, and I think I've got better talents elsewhere. And two, there's other people who just have years of experience on us. So what you tried to do was bring in people who've got experience in the trade and in this world and abattoirs and pet food production to come to our facility. You can bring all the right role players into your business, but they might not necessarily work well together. So even with the team that you had in place, we had to go through a few different iterations of the team structure, the team composition, do a lot of work around the team culture. What is our culture? What does it look like when people stray away from our culture? What corrective actions do we take when people are doing something that's against our culture? So all of that was a lot of work that you had to do around the team, probably about 2 years worth of work to get the team right. And so there's different levels of complexity and improvement that you're trying to do. The one is on the product, and then the other were actually three. The factory, getting that to work exactly how you want it. Second, the product, tweaking that so that it's good cost, good shelf life, good costing, good quality. And then the third level is the team, making sure that it's the right people with the right values and the right work ethic.
And for our readers who are not pet owners, can you maybe just give a brief overview of the treats that you manufactured in those days? Like, what is it exactly?
Certainly. They are the most delicious and exceptional treats on the market. I'll start by saying that. But the thrust about what we're trying to do is move the market away from a lot of these low nutrition treats that you historically found in pet shops and in pet aisles, like biscuits, like cow hoos, like synthetic bones, and a lot of that stuff. And if you went to a pet shop 20 years ago, that's a lot of the stuff you would have found in the pet aisle. It's tasty for a dog, will entertain them, but it's not going to improve their health or improve their outcomes in any way. Biscuits for a dog is the same as a biscuit for us. Very tasty, but not very healthy. And as it happened in the human market over the last few decades, where we've gone from unhealthy snacks and treats to healthier offerings like biltong, dried nuts, dried fruits. We're trying to do that for the pet industry. So our pet treats are things like biltong, just pure natural biltong with, with very little salt and very little spices, because spices and salt are not great for cats and dogs. Dried organs, so the red organs, heart, liver, the lung, and so on, which is very nutritionally dense. And it's actually the part of the carcass that dogs and cats like the most. If you think about a lion making a kill in the wild, they'll typically open up the carcass and eat all the red offal first because that's very high in iron, very high in protein, and easy to digest in comparison to the muscle meat, which is far harder to chew and has less nutrients. So we do a lot of red organ that's dried, and dogs absolutely love it. We do a lot of bones. naturally dried bones that have the natural marrow on the inside. The nice thing about that is that it's safe for dogs' gums and teeth. It's not going to break anything or cause bleeding in any way. It's very, very tasty. And the marrow on the inside is something that they like spend hours and hours trying to get all of it out. So it's a great way for a dog to just be having fun, having a healthy snack, and being a little bit out of your way so you can get on with some other stuff. So it's a win-win for the pet owner and for the pet. And then the last product category and the treats that you have are things like tendons, um, like the big back straps. All animals have them, we do too. There's a lot of tendons there. And tendons are almost like floss for dogs and cats. We can floss and clean our teeth. They use tendons because they break up into fibers that get in between their teeth, and they've got nutrients. So it's all that natural, healthy stuff, which we wouldn't eat ourselves, but dogs and cats absolutely, absolutely love.
I've read somewhere that you deliberately focused on pet treats as opposed to general pet food. What was the thinking behind that?
Good question. We absolutely started with treats because there's less brand loyalty with pet treats. It's similar to a chocolate aisle for us or the snake aisle when you're about to check out at a store. If you see a new chocolate there or new brand of nuts, you're likely to try it if the price is right and if it's something that you like. But when it comes to food, you've probably been buying the same type of bread or the same type of meat for a very long time. And if you saw a wildly new entrant in that category, you'd be more reluctant to experiment with something new. The same is true for treats. It's an impulse purchase, it's a reward for a pet. So a lot of pet owners are willing to experiment and try out new treats, which is important for us as a new entrant in a market that's been around for over 50 years. And once you establish the customer base and trust with that customer base using your treats, then after time you can then introduce pet food because they know your quality, they know your products, they've been feeding your dog, and they've seen the reaction that the dogs have on the treats. So that was definitely the two-step plan that we had. Start off with treats, which we did for the first 5 years, and then we launched pet food in 2019, but then we had to pause on the pet food side because of load shedding. And we still haven't reintroduced it just yet, but we will be introducing our pet food probably next year.
Okay. So, in the beginning, you sorted out your production issues. You had this client in the US. How did your client base grow, and to which other countries that you export? Because I believe, you've got a presence in quite a number of places now.
Yes. So we use the customer in the US as a testimonial to many other customers around the world that we can export, we've got the right quality. If we're doing well in America, the largest and the most competitive market, we should surely do well with you in Europe or the Middle East or in Asia. And we'd find those customers typically by going to international trade shows and explaining who we are, where we currently export to, and making a strong sell for why we want to work with them to sell into their markets. We, at our peak, were exporting to 12 markets around the world, spanning North America, Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. But COVID curtailed a lot of that because it just, destabilized global supply chains and made a lot of people nervous about international sourcing. As terrible as COVID was for our export expansion, it forced us to look at the local market in South Africa a lot more seriously. We previously only had one customer in South Africa who contributed less than 15% of our revenue. And thereafter, we broadened our customer base and our product offering for South Africa, where now we actually have just a little bit more of our revenue coming from the local market versus the export
Oh,
market,
wow.
which is great. It's a market that's on our doorstep. It's been growing. It's easier to serve because we ship today and the customer gets their goods tomorrow. You get paid relatively soon. If there's an issue, you can drive to your customer and resolve the issue. So as tough as COVID was, it's helped us discover a local customer base that's really helped us. Over the medium to long term, most of the growth is on the international side. The South African economy is growing at 2%. The pet market here is growing at about 4%. Internationally, the pet market is growing at about 5% a year, and it's massive. So we really appreciate the local market. We'll continue growing in the local market for the next couple of years. But over the medium to long term, we see our main potential being around exports.
And in the South African market, do you uh, white label manufacture for people who then sell it under their own brand, or do you have your own brand in the South African market?
We do both. And to list our preferences in order of preference, preference number one is to do white label for an established retailer or distributor, whether it's locally or internationally. And the reason that's our preference is because that partner will do the work related to marketing and distribution of that brand. It's their brand, and they probably already have a sales force team and merchandising methods to make sure that that brand will do well. So we really do try for that as option number one. Option number two is selling bulk products for the export market. So that'd be a someone in the US or in Europe or Asia who will say, I think I can pack this down at a better cost than you can do in your market. And I also want to do some of it in this way and some of it in a different way, or some of it is intermediate goods for something else. So we just send them the bulk and packaged treats that they will then package and use however they want. And that's really good for us because it simplifies our operations and our packaging and our procurement. Option number three is our brands. We've got two brands, one for the export market called Nandi, and another one for the local market called Small Batch. The brands we really put a lot of work into, and we love them. We think they're doing well, but there's a lot of money that you need to put into a brand over an extended period for the brand to be regarded as one of the top five in the market. So that's the work we want to do over the long term. But our preference, as I mentioned, is primarily around private label and bulk products. Having said that, the one South African brand that we do have is the one that is growing the fastest out of all our segments and portfolio. So we're glad that we conceptualized it 2, 3 years ago. It's been well received by the local market and it's growing well.
Okay. At what, like, so since you started with the factory, after what time did you feel, okay, I've got a proper business now?
That's a moving target. I thought I would have felt like I've got a proper business when we are exporting for more than a year. And then you get to that target and you feel like there's 50 other targets that will make you feel like you're now an established operator. I think at the minimum, being in operation and serving a variety of customers for a minimum of 2 years kind of gives you the confidence that you're doing things right. Then the next sense that you're doing things right is making a profit, which is quite tricky. We've made profits and then we've made losses, made profits, just because of how the economy has moved over the last 4 years with COVID and then the extreme load shedding. So those, I think, are the two minimum hurdles that I would put for myself as being a proper business. The one was being in operation for 2 years with the same customers or mostly the same customers. And then the second one is breaking even and making a profit.
And you've already mentioned a few, but what other surprises were there along the way, or things that didn't go according to your initial business plan?
So many. Um, I look back on the 7 years that I've been running the business, and when I left consulting to start the business, it felt analogous to going from retiring from one sport to being a professional in another sport. So, like Michael Jordan going from basketball to baseball or whatever the case is. What the reality is you go from being a professional in one industry to being in primary school of another industry. And you really do have to go through many lessons and learnings and mistakes, and costly mistakes of that to get back to where you were, as a semi-pro or a pro in that industry. So with that as the context, we've learned a lot and made a lot of mistakes. And I've seen the mistakes into like four buckets. The one bucket of mistakes is mistakes around product market fit. And I think we started out with too many products that were too fancy, and we should have started out with fewer that were simpler, really get those right, and then scale from there. And yeah, that's just a hard thing to learn, but you learn it, and then you figure out how not to make that mistake again going forward. The second bucket of mistakes is around people. It's hard to get hiring right, and everyone makes mistakes around it. But I wish I had trusted my gut more in making fast calls on whether somebody's going to work or not work. And I think a lot of times you can tell that this is not the right person, but you want to give them more time and more time and more time. Next thing you know, you've lost 6 months to a year, and there's been a lot of impact, financial impact and people impact on not having the right people in the right places. So made a lot of mistakes around that. The third is being too optimistic. Entrepreneurs are super optimistic people, and they have to be by nature. But you need to step away from drinking the Kool-Aid to asking yourself the hard questions, because they'll elicit some of the big risks that you need to be solving for. And I wasn't always disciplined about doing that. And then the final one, what did I want to say around the? I've forgotten what the fourth factor was, but yeah, I'd say those three: the product, people, and not being too optimistic.
I want to ask you about South Africa's, and I'm not sure if it's relevant, maybe the broader Africa's competitive advantage in terms of food products like what you are producing. Because on the one hand, there's a lot of agricultural resources here, labor is kind of cheaper, but then on the other hand, like with South Africa's electricity load shedding, I mean, you've got those issues. Um, a lot of the, maybe not in your business, but a lot of technologies and things that they use in more developed markets that actually drive down costs, like once you've invested in them, are not necessarily um, used on the continent. Sort of, what are your thoughts, about the region sort of competitive advantage to produce food products for markets like the US and Europe and Asia?
Yeah, it's certainly hard, especially for someone who spent 6 years living in the UK and in the US. I compare my experience living there and how well the economy functions, and how other SMEs support each other. Here in South Africa, we have a lot of weak SMEs who deliver late or don't do a great job, and that impacts on your ability to keep scaling your business. So it is challenging. Um, the I got myself really down about the comparison between South Africa and Europe and the US for a while, and then I was just like, but hold on a second, I'm comparing South Africa to the top 20 countries in the world, and of course, we're going to struggle to compete against those in terms of our consistency of electricity, our labor regulations or labor environment, ease of doing business, blah, blah, blah. But in comparison to the other 180 countries in the world, we are definitely in the top quartile. So I think that's refreshing to keep in mind that we're still in the top quartile despite those challenges. So stop complaining so much or thinking about the seven things that are not working well, and try and grow your business knowing that you have a relative advantage relative to most countries around the world. So that kind of lowered my stress around South African challenges. In comparison to the US and to Europe, yes, we are on a back foot, but in comparison to the rest of Africa, to most of Asia, to many parts of Latin America, we're still there and above them. So let's focus on what we have and make it work. And separately, let's focus on the stuff that we have that they don't have. Interesting proteins, interesting stories, unique branding, and so on. So yeah, I've changed my perspective around South Africa to ease my stress levels and also to use it as an advantage for the business.
Okay. And then, lastly, can you maybe just talk a bit about your growth plans for the business, and maybe, if relevant, how that ties into some of the broader trends that you're seeing in the pet industry globally?
Yes. I'm extremely excited about this opportunity. Initially, I thought I'd be doing this for 5 to 7 years, and then I kind of move on to something else. I'm at the 7 year mark, and I'm really keen on doing another 10, 15 years in this business and in this industry. The growth plans that you have are in two waves. The one is fully realizing our growth potential in the local market. The local market is about 4 billion rand for food and treats. A quarter of that is treats, so call it 500 million. And we want to take a significant chunk of that from the guys who are doing biscuits, cow hooves, synthetic bones, to moving the consumers and pet owners to these natural pet treats that are better for their pets and relatively affordable in comparison to what they were buying before. So that's, call it a 250 million rand opportunity that we're chasing in the local market. Beyond that, there's about a 1 to 2 billion rand export opportunity that you want to pursue. As I mentioned, we were exporting to 12 markets around the world. Historically, we're now focusing just on the US, but with an intention to go back to even more than the 12. And that's $180 billion industry. So us trying to pursue 2 billion in sales and exports against a $180 billion industry is still a drop in the ocean. I think what's going to hamper us in the long term is available raw materials in South Africa. We can't use more than we have, but that's also part of the beauty of the business. So this is, yeah, a 1 to 2 to 3 billion rand opportunity that I'm trying to pursue, but over obviously a very long time horizon. And the role model of the North Star that I use from our country is Nando's. That Nando's now does have a global footprint. It's really well regarded in terms of its quickie branding, its delicious food, its high quality, its accessibility. And if the Rosens and Nando's were able to do that in the space of 20 years, what's stopping us from doing something similar in the pet industry?
Nhlanhla, that was very interesting. Thank you very much for your time. I think we'll leave it there.
Thank you very much, Yaka. I've really enjoyed talking to you.